Hello my loves, my name is Hannah and welcome to my wrap up of 2023. What a year of reading it has been. I've had a really good time with my reading this year on the whole. This video is going to be in three sort of sections. We're going to kick off looking at some stats, then we're going to do best books, favourite books of the year, and then we're going to revisit some of the goals / reading intentions that I had at the start of this year, last year, 2023, to see if I managed to achieve any of them or not. This has been my first full year on BookTube, so if this is the first video of mine that you're coming across, hello, hi, I've only had this account for a little over a year, and welcome. Shall we get into the numbers? Okay, I read 157 books this year. Numbers don't really do it for me in terms of working out if I've had a good year or not, but for me, that's quite high. I would probably normally read between 120 to 130 books in a year, so definitely the numbers are up, which is weird because this time last year I thought I was going to read fewer books, but never mind. I track my reading on Storygraph, which really helpfully does a whole load of number crunching for you, so I'm just going to pop up here some of the graphs from this year. Moods, top moods, reflective, emotional and dark. These were my top moods last year and my top moods the year before. This is my vibe. There is absolutely nothing here that surprises me. These are the moods that I read. That's it. I have no further annotation to make, just there they are. Pace this year, here we go. So mostly medium paced books, which I would love to know how is it all just crowdsourced on Storygraph? Because I definitely think of myself as someone who reads more slow-paced books. But yeah, I don't. Apparently I read more medium-paced books, so there we go. Then in terms of lengths of books, I have read exactly half of the books that I've read this year have been that sort of mid-level 300 to 500, then under 300, then over 500. I don't read tons of chunky books, although I own plenty of chunky books. I just am a little scared of them. And I think the genres I tend to read most of, we'll get to genres in a second, but I think they are just more commonly found in shorter formats than longer formats. I think if I read more fantasy than I do, I would read more longer books. Having said that, this is more long books than I read last year. So maybe I'm moving into an era of embracing the chunk. I certainly hope so, because I have some big boys, a suitable boy sat there, some Don Quixote sat there. Maybe next year I will get some more of my chunks. So on to genres now. Here are my top genres: literary, queer and contemporary. Again, no surprises here at all. I think I took my eye off the classics a little bit this year. I think of myself as someone who reads more classics than are represented here, but on reflection I haven't read as much this year, so that's something that I maybe want to get to a bit more this year. Finally, format. I think I only started getting into audiobooks maybe 2 years ago, so the fact that over a third of my reading is on audio now is really exciting, and I definitely think the reason I have read more this year, making up that difference, has probably been all audiobooks, because I definitely have got more used to it and more comfortable listening to audiobooks, though I used to mostly just listen to memoir and non-fiction and stuff on audiobooks, but I've really embraced the novel on audio this year. Not always successfully, but there are some instances where I actually think the audio has been an integral part of like why I have enjoyed an audiobook. So that's just like a sidebar on audiobooks, but yeah, not as much on digital as I maybe will expect in the future, but that we will cover in next week's video when I look at my reading goals for this year. So they're the kind of Storygraph stats. However, I also track my reading in other ways, including manually on a spreadsheet, and I look at other things there too. Particularly what I've been interested in this year is the provenance of my books. So of the books that I am reading, where are they coming from? Now, not necessarily like where am I buying them, but for this section, like, are they the physical books that I have on my actual bookcases? For those of you who haven't been here before, I split my read and unread books onto different shelves. So these 3 shelves that you can, well, not this one actually, this one up there, and this one are unread. So are they from the unread shelves on my books? Are they from a paid for subscription that I have? Are they from the library? That sort of thing. So 59 of the 157 books that I read this year were physical books from my shelf. Which sounds quite good. Oh yeah, like nearly 60 books off my TBR. Except for the fact that that means like 98 of the books I read this year were not off of my actual TBR. So, I mean, never mind. 25% of the books that I read, 41 books in total, were from a paid for subscription that I have. So whether that is Scribd or Everand as it's now called, which I can't get used to saying in my head. I have Spotify Premium, so I have listened to a grand total of 1 audiobook on Spotify. And also I don't have an Audible account anymore. I stopped it partway through the year, but I did still have backlist titles that I had previously got through Audible that I have been listening to this year. So subscriptions like that accounted for a quarter of my reading, and they will have mostly been audiobooks, although I will have got some ebooks from Scribd, Everand. But then 20% of my reading this year has been from the library. So I'm really pleased about that. So it would be great if I had read more of the books off my shelves, but I'm really pleased that a fifth of the books I've read have been library books. They have been predominantly through BorrowBox, so audiobooks and ebooks through BorrowBox. But I have, I think, taken out maybe a couple dozen of physical books from the library, so that's been really nice. And then we've just got really small little ones, like 5% of the books I read this year were borrowed from friends. They've just been like lent to me. 2% were proofs on NetGalley, or a proof that I'd been sent. I'm relatively new, so I don't get sent a lot of proofs, and also I'm terrible at requesting them, so only 2% were proofs. And then 5% of my reading was reading that I had to do specifically for work, so they were books that work had paid for that I had to read. If you're new here, I work in education, so that 5% of books will have been like non-fiction education books. So that is where my books came from. I was gonna go through more stats, but to be honest with you, I am halfway through recataloguing all of the books that I own, and so I'm working on 2 spreadsheet systems at the minute, and I decided to film this video in the evening of the first day of term. So when it came to just finalizing some of these stats, my brain stopped working, and I haven't got any more. But in the future, I am going to be looking at tracking more of my reading. I want to track kind of how long things are taking me to read, more information about the country of origin of where the authors are from and all that sort of stuff. So that will be coming in future iterations of this video, but they're not here today. So that's the stats. Right. Here's the bit that should be the fun bit, but it's actually just the really, really stressful bit. These are my best books of the year. I couldn't limit myself to a specific number, and I was just literally about 15 minutes ago, I was messaging my friend Antonia, and we were talking about the fact that like a 5-star book, I don't star rate my books because of, I know how subjective I am and I know how mood dependent I am. I think a 4-star is always solidly a 4-star, and I can sort of like justify why it's there. I can talk about like the reasons that it's a 4-star book, the reasons it's really, really great. For me, my favorite books and the best books, I struggle more to articulate why I love them because it's more vibesy and because I feel very strongly about them, and that sometimes means I can't rationally articulate it very well. So I also know that the books I'm going to be talking about, on a different day, I might pick different books. So what I haven't done is I haven't ranked them, but I have sort of 3 groups of books that are essentially like honorable mentions, and then I have 4 books that are my favorite books of the year. Okay, so the first category of books are books that weren't necessarily like favorite books, but I think were so good at what they were doing that I couldn't not mention them. Does that make sense? So these are books that just had a vision, had a plan, and they just executed that vision and plan really, really well. The first is Leave the World Behind by Rumin Alam. This is a sort of quiet, looming, I would say thriller, but it's not fast-paced enough to be a thriller. It's like a literary thriller. And if you want to know more about that book, I filmed a video where I both read the book of it and then watched the film adaptation, which will be linked down below. But this was just like, everything about this book was right. It just worked so well. I loved the themes of it. I loved the execution. I thought the characters were really interesting. I thought it was exposing something human and unattractive that lurks within all of us, and it was great. The second one in this category is Shrines of Gaiety by Kate Atkinson. This is just a straight up, really, really well executed historical fiction book that follows a family who are sort of gangsters in the 1910s, 1920s. Could be outing myself as someone who's terrible at history here. But it was part like crime, whodunit, part detective story, part drama, and it was just very, very accomplished and well put together. It's of the Kate Atkinson books that I have read, it is my favourite Kate Atkinson book. And then the final book, although I was tempted to put this in my best books of the year, it could have gone in either, and like I say, it on different days it might be, but it was The Other Bennett Sister by Janice Hadlow. This is a book that is set sort of in the wings of Pride and Prejudice and is then a sort of sequel to Pride and Prejudice, but it centres around Mary, who's the middle daughter in the Bennet family, very much the black sheep of the family. So the first part of the book is within the chronology of Pride and Prejudice, and then the book then continues after Pride and Prejudice finishes. And I just thought that it was so wonderful. It was just, you know, when you're reading a book and it's just filling you with a sense of you've been written just for me, you know? Do you ever get that experience? So yeah, that was a really brilliant book. And if you're an Austen fan, because I know sometimes people get a bit about people messing with, you know, big canonical texts, but I think it was done really sensitively. It diverged enough from the original Pride and Prejudice that it felt interesting and fresh, like it had a new perspective, but also all of the characters did feel like faithful versions, just looked at through a different lens, and I thought it was ace. The next section of books are sort of like, I've called it unofficially, books that I just want to shout out for being ballsy. Like, so books that were, for whatever reason, like pushing boundaries, not being scared to be a bit different, even if they weren't always 100% like successful. I just like was behind the ambition of the book, you know? So the first of these is this year's Booker Prize winner, Prophet Song. This was the only book on the Booker Prize shortlist that I really loved, and it was the book on the long list that I wanted to win. So I was thrilled with the result, although I was less thrilled with the overall Booker Prize long list. But that is, you know, vlog linked down below if you want more of my Booker Prize thoughts. But yeah, this is a dystopian, a literary dystopian book set in Ireland, and it is one of the most uncomfortable and claustrophobic things I have read in a really long time. And I thought it was one of those books where the language and the writing so perfectly matched up with the subject matter and the story. It was just chef's kiss. The next book on this list is Piranesi by Susanna Clarke. I read this for another vlog this year. I'll just link a load of vlogs down below if you're interested. So I read this with my friend far more, not with her, but we ranked a chunk of books that she'd picked for me off of my TBR, and I just adored this book. It is a odd one to describe. Piranesi follows a being called Piranesi who sort of exists in this limitless house and has taken upon himself the task of cataloguing everything that's there, but it's a very empty world. The entire thing is like inside, but it seems like you could roam for like years and never reach the outer limits of this building. So it's a very surreal, odd book. I know lots of people really didn't like it, but lots of people loved it. I was definitely in the love camp. I thought it was so interesting and was just really a masterclass in the slow revealing of the author's hand. And I just, yeah, I thought it was excellent. The third book in this section is a really innovative, sort of epic book, really about the city of Durham. It's Cuddy by Benjamin Myers. So Cuddy is the name for St Cuthbert, who is the unofficial patron saint of the northeast, which is where I live, the northeast of England. And this book begins with the death of St Cuthbert and the pilgrimage that his supporters went on to move his body out of danger. and eventually resulted in the founding of Durham Cathedral and the city of Durham. And the book's told in 4 parts that are all, I think, about 100 years, like 200 years apart, but they're centuries apart, each of the sections of the book. And each section is told in a very different style. I absolutely adored the first section of this book. I went on a real journey reading this book because I thought it was going to be like my favourite book of the year. And then I didn't love some of the other sections, and I didn't think this was going to end up being one of my favourite books of the year, but it has not left me. I think about this book all the time, and it's really a book about legacy and the really far-reaching sort of consequences of small actions in the past and how they have rippled through history. And I just thought it was really, really, really interesting. The 4th book is not a book that I thought, it wasn't a perfect book. I actually read, this was one of the proofs I read this year, and it was Open Throat by Henry Hoke. This is the book that I was like most hyped to get to because it sounded so nuts. This is a book about a very, very hungry gay mountain lion, and it is told from the perspective of said mountain lion who roams around the Hollywood Hills. And I didn't know that this was actually like, there is a specific mountain lion that does this, but my American friend assured me that there's one that lives around the Hollywood Hills, or at least used to live around the Hollywood Hills. And it wasn't a perfect book. There were parts of it that didn't work for me at all, really. But as the theme of this particular section is just books that were really pushing the envelope, I just wanted to mention it here because I think Henry Hoke is a really interesting writer. I would definitely be picking up anything else that he writes because I thought this was such a unique way of looking at the impact of humans, even if I felt the description of gay mountain lion was a little it was selling me on an idea that didn't necessarily come to pass. I really wanted it to be a gay mountain lion, you know. And then the final book in this section is a book by another author from the northeast of England, Eliza Clark. This is Boy Parts by Eliza Clark. This was her debut novel, and it is a very, very weird, fucked up book. But it's told from the perspective of Irene, who is a photographer, and she takes pictures of men in very compromising positions, and it is a really creepy, slowly amping up, tense, kind of dark book, but it's also very funny. And I think sometimes, the thing that stayed with me from this book, some of the visuals will never leave my brain. Thank you so much, Eliza. But also the voice and humour in it, I really, really loved. And I really loved how northeast it was without being like Geordie Rama. Because one of my goals, we'll talk about my goals in the next section, but one of my goals this year was to read more local authors, again, local to me being the northeast of England, because they really are quite underrepresented in British publishing. And what I loved was how unapologetically like of the northeast actually both Boy Parts and Cuddy were. And I think that's part of why I really liked and appreciated both of them. The next 4 books are gut punch books that have just broken my heart a little bit this year, and that I am not over these books. I'm not over these books. The first of these, it will come as a surprise to absolutely no one who's spent any time on my channel, is by Ali Smith. I love Ali Smith. I read all 4 of her seasonal quartet. No, I read Autumn in 2022, and then I read the other 3, Winter, Spring and Summer. this year. Winter was by far my favourite of the 3 that I read this year. It is impossible for me to describe succinctly Ali Smith's books, but just the way she writes people, the way she writes relationships, the way she sort of opens out those relationships to bring in all of society's ills. I just love her writing so much. And there are some parts of this book, some interactions with characters that are just like emblazoned here and won't go away. The next book is All Among the Barley by Melissa Harrison. This is the first fiction I've read by Melissa Harrison, but I have previously enjoyed her nature writing. This is a book that is set in East Anglia. I cannot remember the time period because Hannah lost the plot, but this book has an ending. It's a quiet historical book that is sort of tracking the rise of far right sympathisers in the build up to the Second World War, particularly in rural agricultural communities, and how those ideas were able to take hold in some of those areas. And we're seeing the world through the eyes of a young girl, and just the end of this book, I listened to the audiobook, and I listened to it on a train and nearly just burst into tears on quite a busy train. It's very, very sad at the end, just FYI. The next one in the emotionally traumatizing category is Little Scratch by Rebecca Watson. Again, this is another one that I listened to on audio, and actually I really recommend this on audio because it's told in a very, very stream of consciousness style, and you are inside the brain of a woman who has been sexually assaulted. So content warnings for all of these books, if I'm honest. Not in the immediate aftermath, but her brain is traumatized, and she is trying to put a brave face on, and you are literally inside her head as she tries to go through her day, and it's horrible, but really well done, but horrible. Little Scratch. And then the final one is Sunburn by Chloe Michelle Howarth. This is an Irish book that I have described before and will continue to describe as gay normal people. This is sapphic normal people, and it's set in the 90s in rural Ireland, and it follows 2 girls, teenage girls who sort of fall for each other, start having a relationship, and it all goes wrong. And just this book, I think, you know, as someone who was a queer girl in the 90s, this book just, oh man, it got me so good. It got me so good. But I really, really, really recommend it. It'll make you cry. So those are the honourable mentions, and now it is time. It's time for the best books of the year. These are, I cannot justify why these books are here. I can't explain to you why they're in this section when the other books weren't. This is vibes based, okay? It's just based on instinct. So they're also not in any order. They're not in any order because I can't. In fact, I think they're in order. They're in the order that I read them in, I think. So the first book, and the unofficial book of the year in my queer circle, Our Wives Under the Sea by Julia Armfield. It won the Polari Prize this year. I am not at all surprised. This is a brilliant queer, it's deep sea lesbians, I'm pushing that as an emerging, it's going to be the new lesbians in space, I think. But this follows a married couple where one of them has been working on a submarine and the submarine has disappeared for months, and you're on land with the wife who is still here, and then all of a sudden the company that commissioned the dive get in touch and are like, oh hey, your wife's back. But when she comes back, she's not quite right. And this is like got elements of, it's very literary, and the thing that I loved most about it was how carefully and sensitively drawn the characters were. But there's also elements of body horror, surrealism, and it was just magic book. I loved it. The next one I read was Eleanor Knows by Claudia Pinheiro, which is translated from the Spanish. Oh my goodness, I don't have my copy here. I think by Frances Riddle, but if that's incorrect, I will correct myself on the screen. This is about a woman whose daughter has died before the start of the book, and the police believe it was a suicide, that she took her own life, but Eleanor doesn't believe that. She thinks her daughter was killed. But the reason this is such a compelling and interesting book is the way that it's written. So Eleanor has, I think it's Parkinson's. I read this book in January, so forgive me if I can't remember the details. She has Parkinson's, and she's desperately trying to find out what happened to her daughter, but you're also alongside her having to deal with all of the barriers that she has to getting around because of managing her pain, managing her medication, managing her energy levels. And so on the one hand, it's kind of a whodunit, crimey, you're trying to uncover the truth, but it's also a brilliantly intimate study of, particularly as an able-bodied person, it stopped me in my tracks when I was reading it. And it was really one of the first times that I really felt confronted by the realities that people who don't have a body like mine are confronted with as they just try to move through the world. And it was, but also just beautifully written. But yeah, so that was definitely up there as like one of the books that has just stuck with me. Both of those books I think I read in January of last year, and they've both just stayed with me. The next book that is a favourite is Great Circle by Maggie Shipstead, and I know this is a really popular one. It was very popular when it was on the Women's Prize last year or the year before. This is just a really brilliant feat of imagination in terms of the scope of this story. So we're on kind of two timelines. We're hearing from a woman who was a kind of record breaker. She was a pilot, and she wanted to be the first woman to circumnavigate the globe in an airplane in a time period. I can't remember. Whenever it's feasible that the first woman was doing that time. Following her, and then you're following in the present day a woman who is going to be playing her in a film, and you're watching their two lives unfold. And I think part of the reason I love this book so much is that it taught me a really valuable lesson, which is that sometimes my instincts are totally off for what I think I'm gonna like. I don't know what it was about this book, but every time I heard someone talk about it, every time I looked at it in a bookshop, I just didn't think it was gonna be for me. I don't know what it was about the story. Even people whose opinion I really respect had said, oh no, it's great, I think you'll really like it. I just was so convinced I wasn't gonna like it. And then I think I'd like picked it up secondhand or maybe like on a 3 for 2 at a bookshop and thought, I'm just gonna like, I'll buy it and it'll be on my shelf. And then I picked it up for, I think, another reading vlog. I think I only picked it up because I was doing the We Didn't Start the Fire Billy Joel challenge on Storygraph, and I realised that that book would like satisfy loads of the prompts. And so I picked it up for that reason pretty much. And I was so, you know, sometimes you pick up a book and you're kind of hyped about it, you think it's going to be a favourite book. That is not what I was expecting from this book. I was just picking it up being like, I guess I'll read this. And it ended up just totally teaching me that sometimes I don't know best. And I absolutely loved it. I thought the characters were so interesting. The way their relationships emerged gave me a lot of joy, and I just loved it. I loved it so much. I think it has like almost universal appeal. Like, I can't think of that many people that I wouldn't recommend this book to. I thought it was awesome. Finally, the book that I read most recently, I actually only read it, I think about 3 or 4 weeks ago. That whole December Christmas period, who knows, what are days, what is time? But I read Ghost Wall by Sarah Moss, and this is a tiny little book. It's under 200 pages, and it's set in Northumberland. We're following a teenage girl whose dad is very into local sort of history, but like Bronze Age history, very into British history. And he's sort of wangled his way onto a trip that a university professor is doing with some postgraduate students, where they are in Northumberland and trying to live as like a Bronze Age people, to get a feel for like, I don't know, how they would have like lived and stuff like that. And it is just a very quiet but deeply upsetting, very, very, very memorable book that is, on the one hand, looking at like this intimate kind of like family portrayal. I love books that are a set number of people in a small isolated place. I think that's always just interesting to see how people behave like that. But also this sort of nature of going back to traditional ways of doing things, and how that can teach us a lot, but also there are reasons why progress is also good. And I just thought it was so haunting and upsetting, but really, really beautiful too. So I don't think, is it normal to find talking about your favourite books of the year this stressful? I'm stressed, I'm worried I've forgotten something. I already think I want to change my mind about what categories books were in, but you know, there we go. Those are the best books, my best books of 2023, as of right now. Okay, so then I'm now very, very quickly gonna run through some of my reading goals / intentions for 2023 and whether or not I think I met them. So the first thing I wanted to do was kind of a bit of a nebulous one, but I'd noticed that in recent years I'd got quite tied up in what I call obligation reading, like reading books that I think I have to read either because they are canonical or because they are very hyped, or because they are, for whatever reason, but feeling very ironic for someone who is talking about books on the internet, but feeling very influenced and not necessarily based on what I want to read or where my mood is taking me. And I do feel like on the whole, particularly for the latter half of the year, I got much, much, much better at doing that. And it's definitely something I want to continue for next year. I read the Sarah Moss book as part of a vlog that I did in December, where I was reading some mashed potato authors. So authors that I'm pretty sure I'm gonna love and I have just been putting off for far too long. So I read a Sarah Moss book, a Sarah Waters book, and a Patricia Highsmith book, and I loved them all. And that taught me that that took me until December. It was December before I read those books. So I need to get better at not saving books for like we're never going to run out of great literature. There's always going to be brilliant books to read. So I should just read the brilliant books right now, you know? But I always feel a bit like I've got such a scarcity mindset about it. It's weird, isn't it? I want to stop doing that. And I've made some progress this year. I've had a lot of conversations with myself, but I want to continue to do that. The second goal I had was that I wanted to read more of the books that I owned that were on my physical TBR. And you will have known from the stats earlier on in this video that I read 59 books off my physical TBR. Unfortunately, I bought 67. So I did read books off my physical TBR and then very quickly replaced them. I also said I wanted to use my library a lot more. As you will know from my stats, I have done that, particularly through BorrowBox. And I've really enjoyed doing that. I've read much less on Scribd, to the point where I think I can probably pause my account for at least a few months, because there's so much stuff that I can get through the library that I'm just gonna do that for a little while, I think. The next goal I had was to read more local authors. Hopefully you'll have been able to tell from some of my favourites this year that I have definitely done that. I have a separate little shelf on the top of my piano that is just my authors from the Northeast, and it's been a real joy this year to like watch it slowly expanding. I said I wanted to roughly read one book by a Northeast author every month. I didn't like pace it out like that, but I did read 14 books by Northeast authors this year. So that was a winner. And if you want to know the books that I read, then just drop a comment and I can let you know what I was reading. But yeah, I had a really nice time with that. It's definitely something that I'm going to continue to do. So if you have any recommendations of Northeast authors, then do let me know. Then there were a few Storygraph challenges that I said I was going to do. This is a straight up fail. There's a really fine line for me between being motivated to do a challenge and then finding that challenge really restrictive and butting against it. So I said this year that I wanted to do the Storygraph genre challenge and the Read the World challenge, and I didn't complete either of them this year. I got, I think, a chunk of the way through both of them, but I just found that every time I went to pick up a book to fulfill one of the prompts, it just wasn't what I was in the mood for. And so I do love the idea of those challenges, particularly for like widening your reading and broadening out your reading. And I definitely think I could stand to be more broad in what I read, particularly for Read the World, but I have a plan for that. But yeah, I just didn't do those. I didn't do those. So that was a thumbs down. The next thing I said I was going to do was take part in 2 year-long read-alongs of classic books. I think this is the reason that I didn't read as many classics this year. So I started out doing 2 chapter-a-day read-alongs. One of Les Miserables by Hugo and one of War and Peace by Tolstoy. Now, Tolstoy was going to be a reread because I've read War and Peace before and really liked it. And that's the one that I was much more successful with. And I didn't stick to exactly a chapter a day because my brain doesn't work like that, but I kind of read them in like 7 to 10 chapter chunks over the course of the year. And I found that I did that alongside Simon, who is at Footnotes and Tangents on Instagram, and he was brilliant at just leading people through that process. Les Miserables I've never read before, and I just straight up couldn't do a chapter a day of a book that I hadn't read before. It's totally, I understand the vibe of slow reading, but it does not work for my particular brand of spicy brain. I couldn't do it. And I also fucking hated that book. I was so disappointed in Les Miserables, honestly. I did read it, I read the book, but I couldn't stick to the chapter a day because I just wanted it to be done. So I blasted through it. I think I finished it like in the middle of the year, but oh no. So it was a fun experiment to try that, but I will not be doing any more year-long slow read projects. I have learnt something about myself. They are not good for me. The final thing I said I was going to do, well, there's technically 3 more things I said I was going to do, but the first one, actually inspired by Lizzie Stewart, who I didn't prop her there on purpose, but there she is. Lizzie Stewart is an illustrator, and every year she draws the book covers of the books that she's read and does this lovely graphic. And this is so classic me. Lizzie is like a professional artist and illustrator. I haven't really picked up a pencil since I did A-level art. Over 15 years ago. But I thought this year I would be able to draw the cover of every book that I read on a tablet, using software that I've never used before, using skills that I do not have. And lo and behold, friends, I couldn't do it. I just couldn't do it. But I was filled with the confidence that only someone who has absolutely no idea what they are undertaking can possibly have. I really thought I was going to do it, but I think I drew 6 of them before accepting that I was not magically going to become an incredibly gifted visual artist, and then very promptly gave up. And then I did have 2 more reading goals that I also failed at, but which I'm rolling over into 2024, which means that you will hear about those in next week's video, which will be all about my 2024 reading goals. So we're gonna draw a line there. I feel like I've been rambling for a really long time. Very sorry about that. And yeah, that's been 2023. Please let me know what your favourite books of the year were for 2023. Did you have any reading goals? What were they? Did you achieve them? What are you hoping for 2024? And yeah, see you next week for more promises that I will probably break in another year. Bye, friends.